years in like loving fantasy and all things that are like epic and things like that, the more I mention my middle school years. So obviously, as awkward as I was, a lot happened in between the ages of 11 to 13. Hey, I'm RG Long, and I'm really glad that you're here on this channel. Welcome to Acceptably Epic, and today I'm going to be talking about That's Epic and telling you about a thing that I experienced, funny enough, in middle school that really shaped my love for the genre and is one of the reasons I write the fantasy books that I write today. And the thing that I want to talk about today is Warhammer. Now, you may not be familiar with tabletop gaming or anything like that, but if you are, you probably understand and know what Warhammer is. In fact, I may have called to mind pictures of gray armies just marching over your kitchen table when you were younger, or things like that. For me, I got my start in Warhammer when a friend of mine introduced me to the game in middle school. Now, it's really funny now that I'm looking back onto this and thinking about how my parents were not so great with me playing Dungeons and Dragons, but were totally fine with me playing Warhammer, a thing that had lots of the same elephants like wizards and skeletons and ghouls and demons and things like that. And maybe it was just because Warhammer wasn't as popular as as Dungeons and Dragons was, or maybe it's because I played as the human army that everybody was cool with this, or maybe it's because I was quiet when I was painting my miniatures. Whatever the case may be, my parents were totally fine with me playing Warhammer, and I got into the fantasy game. Now, my buddies and I, we both were looking into the lore and enjoying the games of both Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40,000, which again, for the uninitiated, is Space Wars in the year 40,000. And just to tell you, humanity does not get better according to this game and this lore. So I want to talk to you really quick about Warhammer, the fantasy tabletop wargaming. And I started way back in the 5th edition. The box that my buddy got me started on was the box that came with Sauron, Skinks, and Bretonnians. Again, you may not know what those words mean, but basically it was lizard people versus knights. And that's what the two armies that came with. Now, the great thing about this was you bought this box and it came with 2 complete armies for you to fight your friends with. And now, we were 11, 12 or so when this came out, and so were we playing correctly? No. Did we know what we were doing? Absolutely not. But was it fun? You bet it was. I enjoyed every single minute of that, and especially enjoyed it when 6th edition came out, because in 6th edition it was the Empire versus Orcs. Now, when I was reading through the book and reading through like all the lores of different armies you could be, and there were lots. There were wood elves who like stood in the woods, and high elves who had lots of magic, and dark elves who were evil incarnate. And like I said, there were pure demons. There were demon knights that were awesome, chaos knights. There were the Bretonnians who were like the stalwart, good, honorable knights. And then there were dwarves and bad dwarves and the lizard people, and there was a lot to choose from. But for me, for some reason, when I played the game, the thing that really stuck out to me was the common humanity of the Empire. The fact that it was just the common soldier versus everybody. And Empire armies had tons of little miniatures that would be on your team, because really they weren't all that powerful. But it was the idea that this town, this nation, this state was coming together to defend itself against hordes of goblins and demons and beastmen and all these other crazy armies that came out. And in 6th edition, that was one of the armies that came in the starter set. In fact, in my personal collection today, I still have these miniatures. It came with spearmen, handgunners, a cannon, and a general, and those guys are still in the army that I have. I still have my first army that I painted. The orcs unfortunately went the way of eBay a long time ago. Thank you, college. But this is when really the Empire really started to take, my wargaming started to take shape, was during this edition. Now, I loved this game, and I finally kind of understood what was going on in college around 9th edition. That's when my buddy and I really started playing my roommate, and the games took forever. Now each little miniature that you had, each little army man, was assigned a point value, and those point values you would decide it on the front end how many points you are going to play. 1,000 point army, 2,000 point army, and then each of you would take this amount of points, and you would agree to fight. And our little armies of 1,000 points or 2,000, when we finally got to it, would take 3, 4, and maybe even upwards of 5 hours long. So that when our friends would come by, they would say, "Are you still playing this?" Now, honestly, yeah, we were having a blast, and I lost all the time. Shout out to Dustin, my college roommate who played Wood Elves. I love you, buddy, and I hate your guts at the same time, because you beat me all the time. I could never win against the Wood Elves. I'm probably just a terrible general. The games took forever, but they were fascinating. For me, that was great because you could move your armies around the table, and you had some that would move really slowly, like your handgunners, and you had some who would move really fast, like your knights. And it was just always fantastic to watch how the battle would unfold. But unfortunately, also, the hobby was really expensive. And if you're still playing Warhammer today, you know the hobby is still really expensive. The worst thing you could possibly do is when you buy a box of miniatures. They often come in like a set of a regiment or so, where there are 10, 15, 20 that come in that one set. You can take the price and divide it by how many miniatures are in the set, and you find out that sometimes you're paying $10, $12, $15 a miniature, and that, my friends, is not good on the old bank account. But over time, if you were consistent, you could continue to build up your army and eventually have a really, really big army, like I have in my garage right now, all sitting in a whole bunch of boxes. But the reason that I really loved this game wasn't because the game took forever, and it wasn't because it was really expensive. I thought the lore was awesome. Every time I would read something new about Warhammer, I just thought it was fascinating. From where the Ratmen came to where the Wood Elves lived, and how chaos was coming down into the Empire, and how the Empire was fighting it back, and who was in charge of who. I loved the lore that they had set up with Warhammer and how everything was going. It was an absolute amazing hobby for me, and it really filled out a lot of my love for epic fantasy things, because it was over the top epic fantasy, especially when you would read through the booklets and read about all these long battles that they had, and all these heroes who fought, or these villains who would come and ruin all the plans. All of it was absolutely amazing, right up to the 9th edition. That was really the last one that I played. But really, for me, the painting was super fun. I really enjoyed the hobby of taking the miniatures from the gray pewter plastic that they would come in and spray painting them, and then watching a unit come to life as I would paint crude faces on my little Warhammer heroes, and then stack them next to each other, and then 1 would become 5, and 5 would become 10, and 10 would become 20. And then I would have this massive army out in front of me, an army that I had painted. And there was a lot that I kind of got out of that experience of watching my army grow, and watching like the fruits of my labor, really being able to set them out on the battlefield and say, I painted these guys. I have a fully painted army that I want to fight with, and a fully painted army that I'm going to lose terribly to my buddy Dustin. with. Regardless, it was a blast, and I had a ton of fun doing it. The hobby was great. Now, if you're still playing Warhammer right now, you probably realize that it's a little different. I kind of got into the futuristic one and played with another buddy later on in college and life, and we had fun there. Of course, after playing the Empire for so long, I played the Imperial Guard. Now I think it's called the Astra Militarium. But if you play Warhammer now, you might not recognize it from the name Warhammer. It's actually called the Age of Sigmar, which Honestly, I have a couple starter sets and I've painted the models and played with my kids and seen what the game can be today. And I agree, the rules used to be so complex and complicated that it was absolutely infuriating to try to just learn the basics of what you needed to play one simple game. And so I appreciate that Age of Sigmar has really made the rules much more beginner friendly, and yet each individual unit has the spice and the flavor that you can add to the game and make it bigger and exciting. I've watched some really epic battles taking place in some game shops around here, but unfortunately, because all of my miniatures are designed for the older square days of Warhammer, they're not really suited for the now round bases that everything has gotten, and I just can't bring myself to unbase all of my current army and rebase them into a brand new army. It's not a challenge that I've taken on yet, but it could be something that I do in the future, and that 100% is something that shaped my love of the fantasy genre and something that helped me really get into fantasy as a whole, and it's why I love everything that I do love about it now. And definitely the reason that I love writing giant battles into my books, because I get to kind of play it out in my head in Warhammer type fashion like I did when I was in middle school. Hey, have you played Warhammer before? Have you ever gotten out some tabletop miniatures and played a giant tabletop wargaming game? I'd love to hear about what your favorite war game was, or if you played Warhammer, tell me what your army was down below in the comments. I'd love to hear more from you and how you experience this idea of tabletop wargaming. And as always, if you're liking this channel, please like this video and subscribe with this little cool subscribe orb right here. I would greatly appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you later. Enjoy the journey.